Hello everyone, this is Data-Driven Formula One with Patrick, Henz, and Ganna Pogrebna. Hi Patrick.
Hello Ganna, hello all.
All right, so today we're talking about 1979.
Right, we're coming to an end regarding the 1970s, slowly but surely.
That's right. I think we recently had quite a few specials, so yeah, slowly but surely. That's right.
Right, exactly. I think we still have some specials, and then we will really start with the 80s, which of course will be also quite fascinating decade for Formula One.
Yes, that's right. All right, so let's look at what happened in the season. As usual, we'll show you the preview of the races.
Exactly, and this time it's not as usual, as we put here the three main contenders, because they all somehow have different strategies, which we also already saw in 1978, but we still see this in this year again. So on the left, Ferrari with a quite conventional car, and I put aligned this with reliability. We see Lotus, as always, with the latest engineering technology. So they are with the ground effect car. To be honest, this was already implemented in 1978, and now practically everybody is implementing this too. And this is something where we'll come back to also at the end of this episode. And apart from these two, we have the Renault, which introduced the turbo engine the year before and is still the only one with a turbo engine. So it will be quite fascinating. Quite fascinating to see how the different strategy will work out and who will become the champion.
That's right. Yeah, I just want to say again that you might be listening to this episode as a podcast, but I just want to remind you that our main platform is YouTube. So if you want to see the video, you can go there and have a look. And I will also present on Spotify, right, as a video. Yeah. So Spotify or YouTube, so that's where you can see the video as well. And yeah, just in case you are new and you are wondering why we're not showing videos, well, the reason for that is that we only show things where we have copyright, or we can share that. We can share materials on CC BY license, which means that we actually can do it ethically. So that's the reason we do it this way. There are plenty of videos, of course, and plenty of books and plenty of museums, and we always leave recommendations for what to see and what to read, and that's the way we do it. Yeah. So exciting season, exciting season, and Patrick already gave you an overview of sort of the main contenders, and yeah, this is particularly interesting, in fact, because if previously we saw kind of relative homogeneity in terms of technology, then in 1970s we really have this interesting splits between different types of cars, different types of technology present on the circuit, and 1979 is definitely one of the most interesting years in that regard, because we have three different options here that we're looking at, and yeah, let's see how that played out.
Exactly, and some last words to this slide. Sometimes we get the feedback why people like to follow old-fashioned retro Formula One. And I mean, if you're just looking at these three photos, we have three different contenders with different strategy, different technical solutions, and the three complete differently looking cars. Something which, for example, today we are not find anymore in Formula One. There are, of course, technical differences, but if you would take off the colors, it would be quite difficult to distinguish one car from another. So really, 1979, we have complete different cars, and you will see a little bit later also some other concepts which again look completely different than these three ones.
Yeah, indeed, and it's kind of it just came to me that it's a little bit like a cycle, isn't it? Like we had in 1950s, pretty much everyone was driving the same car, but then throughout the years we had really kind of differentiating technology, and 1970s, 1980s are probably the years where we had most differentiation, and as we go into 1990s, we will see even more crazy designs and different experiments on the circuit. And actually, Patrick and I did a special where we showed like really weird cars.
Yeah.
So do check it out. We talk about the entire history of Formula One there, and I hope you will find that episode interesting. All right, so let's have a look at the standing, and again, the good thing about that season is that we do have different winners at different times, and it's probably just by looking at winning drivers in different races, you probably cannot immediately say who won, which is always something that we like to see.
Yep. So you see here the winning constructors, Ligier fought with a very good start in the season. Then it was a time of races Ferrari. Then we see the first victory for Renault, and then in the second half, quite interesting, and we have a statistic a little bit later where you see this still a little bit more graphical. Williams Ford is emerging as a very competitive teams, and this not only for first time in 1979 inside the season, but in general, it's their first successful season in Formula One.
That's right, and yeah, we also see Gilles Villeneuve in here, and so it is really a very interesting season, and let's just have a look, maybe race by race, what happened.
Exactly. Just have a short last look on the fastest lap.
Yeah.
You see a lot of different names, and quite interesting one name which you don't see inside, which is Jody Scheckter.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. That's right.
And at the end, you will see why this is interesting. But let's start with the season. And as always in the last years, we are going first to South America. This also for based on the weather, because in Europe at the beginning of the year, it's still quite cold and unstable weather conditions with a lot of rain. That's why traditionally we start off on the south of the planet in South America and then going to South Africa.
Yeah, and actually, we when we were discussing, when initially there were just European races, but then slowly Formula One covered the entire world. So we have races in all parts of the world at the moment. We even have night races now in Singapore. And there are also interesting differences with the circuits. So we have like right-handed and left-handed, and so it's really interesting to actually see how the throughout the history that developed. And certainly, it's not a surprise that the first race is in Argentina. But if you think about it, it's basically throughout the 1960s, 1970s. So we saw the change where we actually go to different parts of the world and not just staying in Europe, which is really great. Not only from the point of weather and convenience, but also from the point of view that the fan base of Formula One really has grown over these 20-30 years almost that we are now discussing. Argentina was the first.
Yeah, and of course, the decision which countries we are going to also depends if we have successful driver that year. And here we have Carlos Reutemann as a very famous Argentinian driver, successful this year, also successful in some of the years to come. So, I mean, it's a circle. If there's a successful local driver, then likely there may be the decision to go there. And if you are in the country, you create a higher fan base, which may motivate people go into motorsports and create more talents. So somehow, this should be also a circle. And of course, we have a quite long tradition of successful Argentinian drivers in Formula One.
That's absolutely correct. And yeah, if you look at the first two races, we will see that they were very, very good for Jacques Laffite, who won both race in Argentina and Brazil. And we only then saw the change in the South African Grand Prix. Yeah.
Exactly. So, of course, Jacques Laffite, a very talented driver. If we see the data, we may assume that also his car was in a very good shape in the beginning of the season. And Ligier, as a potential smaller team, maybe they could not keep up the development, or at least in the second half, they had been far away from this quite good, strong form which they had in the beginning.
Yeah, and this was kind of the beginning of the rise of the, I think, rise in consistency. I mean, of the French, racing, because we saw every once in a while French constructors would win championships. In the past, but if we as we will look at future years, we will see, for example, Renault getting stronger, and then culminating in really consistent performance from them. So yeah, it's always great to see French teams being competitive, because it's kind of, you get a little bit tired from just getting Italians and Brits all the time, or some combination of that. And yeah, it's always good to have more countries represented and more countries successful in terms of constructors. Although we do have to make a footnote that now I don't think there is any constructor, maybe apart from Ferrari, right, that is not really international. The majority of constructors are very international, even if they have headquarters in a particular country. The production and parts and team compositions are very, very heterogeneous, and it's amazing to see that.
Exactly, especially as today, and today we mean 2022, we not only have the mechanical part, but more important is getting also the software part, the algorithms, and this leads to a development that companies don't stay local, but are connected with special departments which could be on the other side of the world.
Oh yeah, and I just want to say that on that a little bit, that Patrick and I, we are planning to do several episodes on telemetry, and the telemetry development was already it started to develop from 1970s, and we will see more of that. But luckily now I just recently found some really cool data sets with sensor data, so we'll be able to do data as well, because we've been waiting for this moment. I think from 1980s we'll be able to actually look at data in a more in a more specific way, because so far we just discussed sort of the race statistic, but with the development of telemetry we're actually able to go and look at sensorial data, and as we continue we will do this more and more. And there are currently Python libraries. So for example, there is a library called F1 Fast, where you can actually get really detailed zoomed in view on what happened in a particular race. So as we go along into future years, we will start using that data and showing you more detailed overview of what was happening in a particular season and in a particular race.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly looking forward to that, because
yes.
So far we've been quite chatty, and it's all chatty and historical, but it's just the artifact of the data that we have. And even though we always try to prepare for you some stats and some analytics, so we just in terms of data availability, it's not really much for the earlier seasons. But as we go into later seasons, every car has now 300 sensors, and some have more, and the circuits have sensors, and we will now have an opportunity to discuss analytics in more detail, data analytics in more detail.
Yeah. Also looking forward, and so we will become more data-driven as we get more access to data, besides only using historic data as we did starting from 1950 up to 79.
Yes, absolutely.
With this, let's move on to Sao Paulo. We just spoke about strong Argentinian drivers, 79. Of course, we still had Emerson Fittipaldi active, but as the earlier year in his own team, and he was, of course, still a very strong driver, which he also later showed as he switched to IndyCar. But the national Brazilian team, the car wasn't the fastest, so he hadn't had an opportunity to really competitive battling about the championship. On the other hand, a new driver, young Brazilian, was entering, named Nelson Piquet, and I'm quite optimistic he will become quite successful later on.
Yeah. Well, as we know, he will, and so indeed, we can say that in terms of sort of a variety of countries represented, variety of technologies represented, again, this was a very good year to look at. Yeah. So like I said, again, we have very successful start of the year for Jacques Laffite, and then in South Africa we so there was a change in the leader, and that was Jacques Villeneuve, and a lot of people. Gilles Villeneuve. So Gilles Villeneuve obviously is the still has a very strong fan base, and he's a very not only very well known, but legendary Formula One driver, and I'm sure many people still remember him and are fans of this driver. Yeah.
So no spoiler, we will also do a special episode about him.
Yeah. We did mention him in. We recently did this episode on conflicts in Formula One, where he was he was definitely one of the stars of that episode. But but generally, it's actually, Formula One is impossible without competition and rivalry. But there were some really notable standoffs, right, in the history of Formula One, and definitely, check out that episode where we talk about many different drivers, but Gilles Villeneuve is one of them.
Yeah, and we tried to have a little also to analyze it based to behavioral science, how it came to these conflicts and what had been the results, which
the triggers and outcomes.
The triggers and what was the output of these toxic relations, which unfortunately we concluded in the case of Villeneuve had been quite tragic. But again, we will also do a special episode on Gilles Villeneuve, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah. All right. So that
Okay,
was
so let's
Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa. So next.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we moved to the old continent, but in fact we are not doing this because we are moving first to the US, which at least is again back on the northern part now of the planet. So now we are in spring instead of autumn as in the races before, and we are at Long Beach, California. And we see Gilles Villeneuve continuing his success, now followed by the other Ferrari driver, Jody Scheckter from South Africa, and Alan Jones on the Williams.
Yes, absolutely, and yeah, again, so we'll so once we are out of US again, and you know, we need to stress that, you know, racing in US is quite different from racing in Europe, and if this is the first time you see us, you should have a look at the previous episodes where we keep on constantly comparing different circuits, and of course the circuits in Europe are a lot more sophisticated in terms of the number of turns and complexity. Whereas in the US, it tends to be a little bit more sort of straight lines, and so there are obviously, don't get me wrong, and you know, I'm not saying that it's easier to race in US than in Europe. It's just different characteristics of the circuit. And yeah, if you have a car that is more developed for straight line racing, you will be definitely better off in the US. Whereas, you know, if we take the European circuits, you need a more agile car that is capable of quickly turning and quickly reacting to the driver's direction. And yeah, so this is usually why when we see the change between you know, US and Europe, we're not actually surprised, because yeah, this is quite normal. Yeah.
But then we are finally going to Europe, Spain, Yahama, Patrick Depailler winning before Carlos Reutemann, and finally we see Mario Andretti, the reigning champion on Lotus. This year, 1979, we will see will be much more difficult for him. So it was not that easy as 78. As 78, the Lotus was practically driving in a different league. So it was just a question which driver would win the championship. But this was completely different in 79, and we may analyze this a little bit at the end, why this was the case.
Yeah, and we already talked at length about Chapman and Lotus, so please do check out that special episode. Exactly. And yeah, also you know, this again, we keep saying that you know, season after season, that you can be at the top of the league, right? You can be the champion in a particular year, but it not only does not guarantee the you know, the championship win the next year, but also it's very probable that you will not even have a seat next year. Yep. So there was no like such relative stability as we have now in Formula One back in the day, and you know, you need to keep this in mind, that this was a very risky occupation. In terms of, not only in terms of, you know, risk of getting a seat, but also risk of having a fatal accident. Yeah, you know, when we approach the earlier years of Formula One, we always need to keep that in mind.
That's correct.
Belgium, which is always an interesting circuit, and if you are again, if you're not familiar with Belgium, it's well, usually why it is interesting is that it almost always rains, and if you don't know why it's interesting when it rains, when it rains, all cars have to slow down, which means that if you are in an inferior car, you have a chance of winning against a superior car in Formula One, because in the rain, the driving ability actually plays more important role than the technical capabilities of the car. That's why we're always excited about Belgium Grand Prix, well, German Grand Prix, British Grand Prix, where, we're likely to see some rain, although, recently we have British Grand Prix mostly in summer, and there is a chance that it's not going to rain, but Belgium is one of those where it's often rains. Yeah, it often rains.
Yes, and I can confirm this. I lived right at the border, and it's really raining a lot there. And also, I know Zolder, the racetrack. I had been there various times, not for Formula One, but other kinds of races. A quite small, old-fashioned track. Which was not kept up with the development over the time. That's why we don't find Zolder, for example, in the calendar for such big events anymore.
That's right. And so the race in Belgium was also really interesting because we saw Alfa Romeo, right? Again,
Exactly.
finally. Yeah, because we did have Alfa Romeo before, and before it was in 1950s, it was winning a lot, winning all races in some seasons. But now we have we have it here again, which is great.
Exactly, and you can see here this car. And by the way, this is the car which was run in on the Monza Grand Prix a little bit later with Vittorio Brambilla. Brambilla had been involved in a very spectacular accident, which unfortunately was fatal for Ronnie Peterson 1 year ago. Many people thought Brambilla would never return, also because of his advanced age. He was already in his 40s. And in fact, he not returned as a normal driver, but let's say as a development driver for Alfa Romeo. And due to this, he participated, I think, only once in '79 at the home Grand Prix. So in Zolder, the car was a little different colors. It was completely red, and it was the car by Bruno Giacomelli, who qualified 14th. And to be honest, Alfa Romeo was not showed the same strengths as in 1950 or 1951. And also about Alfa Romeo, we have a special, which you can check out, Alfa Romeo 1950 until 21, speaking about this period. And also, if you're interested, we have one episode about the earlier years before official Formula One.
Yeah, that's right. But it's always great to see Alfa Romeo there. And, from 1950, we know that this was a very, very strong technology that they've put out there that was then, basically copied and became really iconic. And it's always interesting what Alfa Romeo does in Formula One, even if they're not competing as a team, if they're just contributing some bits and pieces, or they as here we do have their cars, so they always do something innovative. So it's always interesting to see. Yeah,
exactly. And luckily, so far we are in May 2022, just before the Miami Grand Prix. So just that you know, I mean, they're doing quite good in the season today, and they participate as a team, but it's a little bit apart because they bought the name. It's the Swiss Sauber team, so they're located in Switzerland. And maybe you say it's a little bit the Ferrari junior team as Alpha Tauri for Red Bull.
Yes, but let's see how they do, and definitely it's nice to see the brand, even if it's not even if it's not the same. Yeah, it's always nice to see the brand there.
I completely agreed, and it's great to see that they really have a competitive car this year. But let's wait for our episode on 2022, which I think you will have to wait a little bit. As you see, we are in 1979, and let's go back to Monaco.
Yeah. Okay. So so we have then the three European races, the next European races: Monaco, France, and the UK. And the one of the interesting things about the Monaco race that it was last race for James Hunt, and he basically was one of the faces of Formula One for quite a while, and we discussed at length James Hunt and Niki Lauda, and to what extent the rivalry was exaggerated in popular culture, and we talked about his success and success of Niki Lauda, and we also have a special about James Hunt. But yeah, we just need to remind ourselves that this was the last race for him.
Yeah. Niki Lauda once stated about James Hunt that he had the perception that after he won the championship, he hadn't had the fire anymore. He didn't have this final motivation. But if you see a little bit the data, the year after, the McLaren wasn't as competitive as before, and this was also the reason, I think, why he switched from McLaren to Walter Wolf Racing. You have to remember, Walter Wolf Racing had a very competitive car in 1978 and was very competitive with Jody Scheckter. So James Hunt got the seat of Jody Scheckter with the idea to have a competitive car, but unfortunately, the Wolf Racing car wasn't as good. I mean, it wasn't even near as good as in 78. So not a good season for James Hunt until Monaco. And this, I think, also led a little bit to his retirement as he perceived himself in a position where he didn't saw an opportunity to become competitive anymore.
Yeah, and also, this probably also has to do with, the character,
Yes.
where James Hunt as well. We showed if you saw the special that we've done on him,
Yeah.
he's like one of those like star drivers, right? So always in some. Always in the spotlight, always at some parties. So I think as we see with this type of character in Formula One, it's usually pretty early retirement, and also I think it's quite difficult to keep up, right, with your training and with everything else. It is, I think, to me, I think it was a bit premature for him to leave Formula One, and I think it would have been really interesting to kind of see him at least for a few more years, and it is a shame that he decided to retire that early. But at the same time, we that gave an opportunity to other drivers to participate, and certainly even if we will not have James Hunt in the sport from 1979, we certainly will have other people and great Formula One drivers. So yeah, it is unfortunate, like I said, but let's see what happened with new people. Yeah, with new drivers.
Yeah, and I completely agree what you mentioned. It was at the end of the 70s, it was somehow the end of the Playboy pilots, as of course James Hunt was the number one example. And quite ironically, this change was initiated by Niki Lauda, as he was the first driver who really understood how important it is to spend the hours in the gym, as he had to come back after his infamous fire accident. So Niki Lauda was practically the first of this who implemented a Formula One driver as a strong athlete, which I think was the perfect example later, Michael Schumacher. So right, it was practically an end of an era. Maybe the very last of this example in the 90s was Eddie Irvine, and here we also saw a very big talent, but maybe if he would have spent some more hours in this gym on the track, he would have become also a champion. But anyway, this will be a topic for later episodes.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is obviously. I just want to say that, you know, when kind of laying the foundation for why it is important. It's not only important because, you know, the Formula driver started to look better over time.
Yes.
I mean, in a sense, they are more fit. Physically fit, but you know, you have to understand that this also goes back to data, right? And since we are on data-driven Formula One, the data is that obviously if you weigh less, it helps. If you if you're more agile inside the car, it helps, and so on and so forth. So it is the fact that, you know, Niki Lauda sort of introduced that change, and many other drivers followed the suit, is because you know, it really improves the performance. So, you know, if it was if it were the dominant strategy to have bigger drivers, then we would have seen bigger drivers. But the dominant strategy is to have a person who is lighter, like more agile. So therefore, you know, the physical training became really important. But it's not like James Hunt wasn't fit. I mean, he was fit. Just for the fans of James Hunt, we're not saying that he wasn't fit. It's just, you know, we're just saying that it was a change, and, you know, he was one of these superstar drivers who just decided to retire. So I think there's a lot of like chance factors there as well. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. All right. So France. And this is where we see the turbo car win, and Patrick gave us a really great overview of different technologies at the beginning of the season when we started this episode. And so this was again the great milestone, and you know, there was always this controversy with turbo, whether to use it or not to use it in Formula One. But, you know, finally we saw the victory of turbo car after many years, right?
Exactly, and spoiler, they will become quite dominant later in the beginning of the 80s. Important, it was not the first victory of a turbo car, because the very first one, 1950s, 1951, the Alfa Romeo 159, this was also a turbo car. So we have to consider this. It was like a renaissance of the turbo cars.
Sorry, I should have said the first from the introduction, because we talked in 1978 season how it was kind of reintroduced, right? So this was the new victory, in the new era of Formula One.
Exactly, and for Renault at their home Grand Prix, maybe the only accident in the marketing was that it was not their star driver Rene Arnoux, but the second one, Jean-Pierre Jabouille, who took home the victory. But besides this, of course, great for the Renault team.
Right. So now we're going to England and Silverstone. Again, anything can happen in Silverstone, as you all, I'm sure, can imagine. So here we had a very successful race for Claire Regazzoni, which is always great to see Claire Regazzoni at the top of the grid. a great driver. And so we also had the first victory for the Williams team, and I cannot wait until we are going to talk about the Williams team, because it's such a cool team. Very had very long history of competing in Formula One, was very revolutionary team, and very innovative. And because they didn't have the budgets that other teams had, this team always showed how you can pretty much grab all innovations from the market and put together a new car every season. And it's absolutely fascinating, this team. So I really can't wait until we talk about Williams. But again, this was a very breathtaking race in Silverstone. And if you get a chance to see the footage, there is plenty of material, copyrighted material, that you can get access to, even on YouTube. With official Formula One channel, where you can actually see this race, and I highly recommend that you do have a look at it.
Yeah, and also here quite interesting footnote. This wasn't the first Williams teams we had before this. Frank Williams Racing, which hadn't been a big success at all, and it was later acquired by Walter Wolf Racing and became part of the Wolf Racing team, while Frank Williams had been an employee, but due to the difficult characters of Walter Wolf, and I think also Frank Williams, they two couldn't work together, and Frank Williams again founded his own team, and this time it was really the starting point of big success. And they're still in Formula One until today. A little bit struggling in 2022 still, but I mean, they're showing progress in comparison to the last year.
Yeah, I think, once we didn't have, I can say, strong leadership from Frank Williams, because of his health issues. We saw that there was an issue already, is kind of in the latest seasons, but it's still great to see them, and still great to see that they haven't quit yet, even though a lot has happened, like with ownership, and with leadership. And but certainly when Frank Williams was around and strong, the team was really one of the most successful teams in the history of Formula One, and we should definitely acknowledge that. And a very interesting business model. Like I said, it's we see different supply chain management structures with the constructor teams. And if we look at, for example, Ferrari team, it's a vertical supply chain in the sense that they tend to produce everything in-house, right? Other teams have more horizontal supply chains where you produce something yourself and something you outsource and buy even from competitors, right? For example, when we had Mclaren Mercedes, right, the engine was Mercedes, and then the rest was produced in the UK. And so on, and we had Ford engines in for example 1970s, in the seasons where we already discussed, but Williams is, I'm just saying it's a horizontal supply chain from another planet, because they really take the were seasons where they took technology from basically it was very, very new technology, very experimental technology, and they would put all of that technology into their car. This is absolutely amazing strategy, and it's quite unique, compared to other teams that perhaps have a little bit more money, and also different from other small teams that have little money and just try to do some kind of replication of the leading technology and try to compete. Yeah. But we will talk
Exactly.
about Williams separately.
Exactly, and just last note on this. I mean, you can see that this directly aligns to Frank Williams. As in the beginning, I remember the car was designed in Italy by Dallara, De Tomaso, for the Frank Williams team. So really, this outsourcing started right from the beginning with Frank Williams.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, and as always, an interesting sort of chain of European circuits: Hockenheim, Spielberg, and Zandvoort.
Yeah.
So that's Germany, Austria, and Netherlands. And again, here we have I'm not gonna say surprise, but we haven't seen Alan Jones at number one. But
Yep.
this was again the very interesting series of 3 races where Alan Jones had very, very good performance.
Yep, quite talented driver, which we'll see also in later years. And so he got the victory for the Williams teams before Clay Regazzoni and Jacques Laffite.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna say as always, but as quite usual, the Netherlands didn't go by without having a dangerous episode, right? So we see quite often the German Grand Prix being quite dangerous, but also the one in Netherlands is pretty, was also pretty dangerous in 1970s.
Exactly, and this time it was related Gilles Villeneuve, and maybe if you look around a little bit in Google, you can see videos of this, because it was quite a famous incident. He was just passing the pits as the left rear tire exploded, causing him to spin. Then he regained control to begin one of the wildest laps in history. And that's why I said, I think you may be able to find video footage of this.
Yeah, not only you can find it, but I think when you watch coverage of Formula One from different providers, this is usually one of the videos that they use for trailers and all sorts, because it's such an iconic moment in the history of Formula One. And also, I just want to sort of zoom in a little bit on this episode, because pretty much if you look at the previous history of Formula One to this date, it was quite uncommon to have such a significant such a significant failure, right? And still be able to, continue on shredded rubber, pretty much, right? So that was quite a significant difference from, where previously you would be, in a very dangerous position. This not only showcased how good Gilles Villeneuve was, but also, told you what was possible, what were the new possibilities in terms of, say, car safety and driving ability.
Yeah, and for you who are just listening to the audio podcast, just to mention why it was one of the wildest lap, because he drove the entire lap on just 2 tires.
Two tires,
and it was really, very spectacular to see, including the sparking of the pavement of the car. So it really looked very spectacular. Of course, you may say it wasn't that efficient, as nevertheless he was driving quite slow, so he couldn't enter the first positions with that, but it showed Gilles Villeneuve's character to never give up, really.
Yeah, but I mean, when that happens, I mean, if you've been in a fast car, I'm not going to say Formula One car at those speeds, but just in a fast car. Well, imagine being in a fast car and 2 of your tires go. It's a very dangerous situation. Like, he didn't, considering that he didn't spin off, he didn't have, he didn't have a really serious, well, it was a serious situation, but he didn't have an accident as a result of that, where many drivers would, right? This is really quite spectacular, and like I said, this particular snippet, like if you find it online and watch a video of it, I'm sure you will recognize it because you would have seen it before. And like I said, it's used very, very often in different trailers and in different TV programs.
Yep. And now we are coming Monza, one of the highlights traditionally in each year because of the racetrack, of the Tifosi, of course. And for Ferrari, this time everything went together. First of all, it was the 300 start for the Scuderia Ferrari. Second, because Jody Scheckter could ensure the championship. And remember in the beginning where we pointed out that one name was missing, who had the fastest lap. None of the races Jody Scheckter had the fastest lap in 79, but nevertheless he won efficiently Grand Prix and scored enough points. And with this he became the champion and also ensured the Constructors Championship for Ferrari.
Absolutely, and I was just going to say that when we showed you the table at the beginning with the season overview, it was not very clear who would become a champion from that table. Yeah. But in terms of in terms of driving competition, the drivers' championship. But if you looked at the constructor championship, you could see that was Ferrari because it's just were more entries. And again, this goes back to our point that if you and I think this strategy was used by Niki Lauda, very efficiently, that you didn't actually need to win every time, right? So you don't need to maximize wins. You really need to maximize your performance in terms of stability. So if you're stable in terms of you're trying to score maybe one of the 3 places every race, you probably are quite you are still very competitive and you can still win the championship even though you're not on fastest lap every time. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah. So now everything was decided. Nevertheless, of course, the season continued.
Now Canada again, very interesting race. This one, right? Because we had Alan Jones and. Here, Niki Lauda retired, and this is, I think, why actually, they always tend to compare Niki Lauda to James Hunt, is because of this retirement thing. I think if Niki Lauda stuck around for another season, maybe it would have been that, this comparison all the time. So, of course, it was an interesting rivalry, but. Again, to me, both of these guys, I think they retired a little bit too quickly.
Yeah, well, and at least in the case of Lauda, he quite successfully returned. And maybe, if I'm correct, it was the only example where a comeback of a Formula One driver after 1 year or 2 years off really had been successful. There had been other examples like Nigel Mansell, they didn't really work out. And also James
Michael Schumacher came back, right?
Yeah, you're right. It also
not very successfully, but did come back.
Yeah, he did come back. It wasn't as successfully as in Ferrari, but maybe from a realistic point, it wasn't to be expected, as Mercedes wasn't there to be to win championships at these years.
Yeah,
so
and
maybe
again,
it was important because he developed the car and enabled them to win championships later.
Yeah, but and I want to. So sorry, Patrick. Yeah, I just want to raise this point, and I think we need to do this little bit of this discussion, maybe as a separate special, because you have to understand that the fans are always interested in wins, right? And we want to see who won and all that. But the business of running a team is quite different. And if you watched, for example, the movie called Moneyball, right? It's not always the profitability of the team is not always about wins, and in fact, winning does not necessarily mean financial success. So that's why, when we see drivers coming from retirement, it has to do with sponsorships, it has to do with profit, and it doesn't mean that if you maximize wins, you also maximize your revenue as a team. So there are some other considerations there. And this is a very interesting discussion because it's not always only happening in Formula One. So we just one of my students at the moment is looking at football, American football, and soccer, and we actually see that a lot of teams, a lot of teams that maximize scoring, they maximize goals or maximize wins, they're not the most financially successful. There are other teams who have different strategies and they're more financially successful than the ones that are about results. So Formula One is not an exception.
Exactly. And also, we underlined it before, especially in the episode about Jochen Maas. Also, the number 2 driver has very important tasks. For this, important not only to have the star driver, but have the second driver who does a lot of the important work and also do based on his character, doesn't feel the need to be the number 1, but prefers being a good team player. So it's also important to have a very good, efficient number 2 driver in your team, depending on the overall strategy and so on.
Yeah, again, we see that we talked about the success of Ford engines, and also with this race, we saw that the Brabham switched to Ford engine, and again, it's not very surprising, of course, considering that Ford was a major supplier of engines at that time, but. Again, it's a little bit sad for Alfa Romeo in terms of their engine, but again, they had a team in, so it still was present.
Yes, and it was also a little bit related to the construction. Alfa Romeo, the same as Ferrari in 79, they had these big flat 12-cylinder engines and very powerful, but the problem is as the engines are flat and big, you cannot combine it very efficiently with a ground effect car. That's why Brabham wanted to have a different kind of construction, which enables them to create modern aerodynamic cars. So this was also playing a little bit in the decision why Brabham switched from Alfa to Ford. Besides this, of course, Alfa Romeo the same year entered with their own team. So you could imagine that Brabham would be then the number 2 for Alfa Romeo besides themselves. So there had been also different kind of aspects. And this, of course, impacted Lauda's decision, his motivation. And he had this famous sentence that he became tired of just driving in circles. That's why he argued why he left Formula One, that he became tired of just doing that.
That's right, and we obviously talked about Brabham in extensively. So please do check out the special and. It is interesting, and we probably should talk about this separately. So the evolution of Ford in Formula One, and there's definitely a lot of in popular culture about Ford as well, and we certainly will come back to this topic later.
Exactly, we have a lot of time in the 80s as they stay dominant for many years. Another side note for Canada, Alfa Romeo, and we're speaking about the Italian team, refused to participate in the pre-qualifying. Due to this, only Vittorio Brambilla was allowed to enter the race. And this will be, I think, another important topic We have this FICA war between the two different organizations. And due to the requirements, Alfa Romeo had to participate in the pre-qualifying. On the other hand, they had the idea that as a big manufacturer, they shouldn't be forced to do the pre-qualification. So there had been quite a discussion. And at the end, they decided that their number one driver wouldn't start. Only the second one, Vittorio Brambilla, entered the race. A lot of politics in Formula One. And this includes
to date, it doesn't change, does it? So yeah, always some controversies and politics. Yeah,
exactly. And this, of course, also related to Bernie Ecclestone, who was there also in a responsible position. He was already a leader of one of these organizations. Besides being the owner of the Brabham team, at the same time, what of course is a conflict of interest if you analyze it. So again, everything relates to Brabham, Alfa Romeo, as also in this race.
All right, and then we're back to US. Yeah, so as you can see, though, we have 2 US races in the season, and this one was in Watkins Glen, and Gilles Villeneuve again, successful here as we saw, and again we saw also some retirements. Again,
exactly. You see the last race for Jackie Hicks, Alex Ribeiro, Arturo Messario, and Hans-Joachim Stuck. Besides last race for these drivers, we saw the last victory of a flat 12 engine, and this particularly for what we already discussed, they become not the best solution to combine them with the ground effect cars. So it was last victory for such an engine in Formula One.
Yeah, so let's look at technology, right? We're going to technology.
Technology. Yeah. Here we see again the Ferrari and the Constructors Championship. Ferrari won with a big gap to the second, 113 points, to Williams 75 points.
And such a beautiful and very compact car, right? So yeah.
Right, and very powerful with this mentioned engine. And then we see the Ford teams, Ligier Ford, Lotus Ford. Lotus, very disappointing year as being the reigning champion. And on the next slide, we may discuss why this happened. Then Renault with the turbo car, 26 points. Mclaren Ford also quite disappointing. Same to say for Brabham Alfa Romeo, as they've been on fourth position last year, now only 7 points. Then the very small teams, RTS from Germany, and they mentioned Fittipaldi Ford team from Brazil, and some even smaller teams with no points at all. The Brabham Ford combination, Wolf Ford, disaster after the success in the last year. Ensign Ford, Alfa Romeo, Messario Ford, where Arturo Messario for the owner and the driver. Rebaque Ford, the private team of the Mexican driver. Oh, I forgot the first name, the given name, but Rebaque. And the Kausen Ford, a very small German team, very interesting car. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a photo to show you, but it was a very interesting ground effect design. But unfortunately, due to missing budget, this team went also nowhere.
Yeah, but I mean, I just want to also draw your attention to how many Ford collaborations. So there's practically dominant dominant engine that season. Yeah,
exactly, because it not only because of the horsepower, but because it was much smaller as the engines from Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, and for this combined much better to the ground effect cars.
Yeah, and as promised, how did reliability, ground effect, and turbo did against each other?
Exactly. So ground effect car, you remember 1978, Lotus introduced this complete new concept of the aerodynamics, not only of the car itself, but also of the part down the car. Why they could not reproduce their success? First of all, because the car was fast, but relatively fast, but not reliable. So you have to finish the races to win races, first of all. And secondly, ground effect, a great idea, but very easy to copy. So practically all of the cars had some kind of ground effect, maybe not at the same level as Lotus, but practically everybody copied the same concept. So this competitive advantage was gone for the Lotus team. And this, I think, had been the two reasons why Lotus couldn't repeat its success in the next year.
That's right. And finally, turbo.
Finally, turbo. And if you see the numbers, especially in the second half of the season, Renault became successful with this new concept. So practically the yellow on the right replaced the red on the left. So Ferrari practically could win the championship because they had a much better first half due to its reliability. And so even if they hadn't been the fastest car in the second half of the season, they still could score enough points to bring the championship home for driver and constructor, which worked out in 1979. If it will still work out in 1980, it's a little bit questionable, but stay tuned for our next episode.
Yeah, and I just also want to draw attention to Williams that,
Yes.
Despite, being a relatively new team, we see, very successful run. Yeah.
Exactly. And you pointed out the strategy, why they became successful. And really, they had become, you may say, the dominating team in the second half of the season.
That's right.
Okay, then have a view on the cars first, the winning 300.
Again, I just want to say if you are listening to us as a podcast, I mean, this is something that you can see on YouTube or Spotify, where we actually look at the pictures of the cars, and we will have a discussion now of what these cars were and what they look like.
Yeah, and here you see the Ferrari as it was driven, I think, only in the city track of Monaco, because it was quietly shorter. The wing normally would be here behind the wheels, but here it was a little bit before the wheels, so it made the car much shorter, much more compact, and this is what they only drove in Monaco, because it's such a small curvy course. Not that common to create in Formula One, but let's say on the sport prototypes, this was a quite known strategy, where in Le Mans they all use the long versions of their cars, and in other tracks they use much shorter versions of their cars. So here Ferrari used the same strategy.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is Ferrari's 312 T4 for those who cannot see and see the video and are listening to us as a podcast. Yeah.
Exactly. So T4, because it was already the first version of the car which started being successful with Niki Lauda. So and that's why we have this kind of reliability. There had been no revolutions inside Ferrari in this time, but continuous evolution.
Lotus, yeah, always always very interesting technology. And again, we still have this eggshell technology there, but like Patrick explained, it was a I think if we look at 1970s, well, since we are in 1979, I think it will be fair to say that 1970s as a decade was a very, very successful decade for Lotus.
Yeah.
They've done some really revolutionary work, and this was, of course, I think the problem was that what worked in 1978 didn't quite work for them in 1979 because a lot of teams copied the innovation, but still, despite the ground effect, the fact that they could not quite leverage on the ground effect, again, they always have had some really innovative ideas. And really cool, by the way, really cool photo that Patrick found where we actually can see the guts of this thing. So you don't see the car, as it was racing, but actually you can see the insides, which is great.
And also from an aesthetical point, very beautiful livery, the combination of dark racing green together with the iconic Martini design, the red and blue stripes. So
yeah, I still like the black better, but yeah, this is nice.
Yeah,
I mean, this is in terms of like traditional British, yeah, it looks okay.
Right, more traditional, I would agree. More iconic, of course, the black and gold.
Yeah, I like the black and gold. But that's personal preference. All right, so next one is Tyrell. Again, very cute car. And definitely also, Tyrell gave an opportunity for many younger drivers to race. And yeah, certainly this was a good, a very good team. And yeah, the car itself is, I mean, it's a little bit, like I said, it's very cute, but it's a little bit clumsy, I think, in the back. In my opinion, anyway. But yeah, looks very cute in terms of colors and everything else.
Yeah, maybe this is because Tyrell was going for 2 years with the 6-wheelers, so they lost a little bit experience in developing 4-wheelers, and that's why the car maybe looks a little bit conventional, as that maybe
yeah, it looks like they just took out the two wheels and but still like no, but it is cute, I have to say. Yeah, very nice looking car, but yeah, I can imagine that they struggled with the length of it. It just looks a little bit weird.
Yeah. And speaking about a little bit weird, also, as from my point of view, the BT48 wasn't looking as aesthetic as the earlier Brabhams, and this again a little bit related.
A little bit like a tank. This one.
Exactly, a little bit like a tank, and this because they had this big flat 12 cylinder Alfa Romeo engine and wanted to combine it with the concepts of ground effect cars, and very difficult to bring these two together, and that's why the car looks a little bit like a tank here.
Yeah, so that's what happens. I just want to say this is what happens when you don't pick one strategy and you try to leverage on all technology you've got. So, and this is actually very characteristic because, in Formula One, you really do need to make your bet on something, or like on one thing. And that's what ultimately brings you success, because this car looks like a really like hybrid compromise type of car, and you always get something weird out of it. And yeah, I mean, like Brabham was an absolutely amazing engineering talent, but it is a weird car.
Yeah. Right, remembers that he still had this Gordon Murray as the chief engineer, who became a legend himself. So, but again, then Brabham switched the idea with switching to Ford, and with this they made their bet on the ground effect car.
Ground effect, yeah.
Somebody whom we not saw that much this year, Mclaren, the M29.
Yeah,
also,
and again with Marlboro on the wings. And so this one is quite, I think what sort of killed this car that particular season and is that it doesn't look very aerodynamic to me, especially with this side wings. And I think this was what probably killed it on the speed front. So I think you will be losing quite well, at least
like
several seconds, milliseconds, every time, every circle, every lap.
Right. It looked to me a little bit more like the turbo cars from the early 80s, where they not have been that aerodynamic, but very brutal to have a lot of space for the fuel they need. So you're right, a little bit out of its time.
Yeah. So I agree. So they went with the strategy, kind of not to refuel and not to have maybe as many pit stops, but it kind of backfires because you do kind of need the pit stops. You can't go without them, so you can't really maximize that time. I think what you need to do is kind of be more efficient with when you do them and all that kind of stuff. But certainly interesting ideas here. But they're probably not as well executed as we'd like.
Yeah. This we're coming to the very small RTS team.
Yeah, I do really love this car, the ATS G2. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and also the photo looks very much like 70s with that, looks like a paper photo with where the colors already run away a little bit.
Yeah, this car really reminds me. Remember when we did the special on Minardi and those types of cars? So it's it is very cute in terms of this yellowy orange color. Actually the shape is not bad. I mean, they probably, I don't know what the problem was there. Probably the engine wasn't, fitting as well as in the other cars. And but it does look like it should be competitive.
Yeah, RTS had various problems similar to many of the smaller teams, that budget was missing, and then also the team owner had a quite difficult character, so we had a high turnover of employees, which also not really helped the development.
Yeah, it doesn't help when you reshuffle people, I agree.
So various problems, nevertheless, and we mentioned it before, these small teams had been very important for Formula One at these times, because here the young talents could start. And unfortunately, from my point of view, we don't have these small teams anymore in Formula One, as everything became very professional. And so the big teams have their little daughter teams, their little sister teams to build up the talents. So today we don't have these small teams anymore in the sport, which is a little bit a pity.
Yeah, I agree. It's a shame because you would see really sometimes really crazy things as well, and I kind of miss it. And I agree. You would have also some surprises when a new competitor would come and do something really innovative, kind of in a smaller team, and that no longer happens. But that also has to do with, I think, entry barriers to the sport. You need a lot of money now to enter, and it's difficult. Yeah, if you're in a smaller team, it's just difficult.
Exactly. Right at the moment, we have, I think, the decision pending if Mario Andretti can enter Formula One, yes or no. And it seems a lot of the actual teams want to prevent this. So let's see how this will work out. Would be, of course, quite fascinating to see an Andretti team in Formula One in 20 24 or
23, 24, yeah, 24, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I'm not sure when they wanted to enter, but again, I think we all would like to see them also as a more have a second US team, which would of course support the marketing for Formula One too.
Yeah, Fittipaldi, well, another disaster. F5A. No disrespect to Fittipaldi, I already said that he's like one of my favorite, all-time favorite drivers. But yeah, I do think it was a horrible mistake to race for. I mean, look, I on the one hand, I absolutely appreciate that once you're a champion, you've decided to go into and develop Brazilian team, and but in terms of like management and all that kind of stuff, like you shouldn't really. It just tells you that working with family members rarely works out, and this definitely is one of those one of those examples. And yeah, to me, I think it was a bad idea for Emerson Fittipaldi to go to work with his brother. but and on the one hand, it's great to see a Fittipaldi car, a Brazilian car, in the competition. It's really interesting. But at the same time, I think his talent could have been better spent maybe in a bigger team with more competitive car. And this car is really weird. I mean, it's
but right,
there are many problems there.
Yeah, I mean the car. It's weird. On the other hand, it has a very clear shaped wedge design, which looks cool with the yellow, of course, aligned with the Brazilian flag. You see this kind of rainbow colors on the side, which for me represents all the colors of the country itself. If you have the opportunity to travel to Brazil, you will see all these colors, these people, the joy of living in the country. So the design reminds me a lot to Brazilian culture. So it looks very cool. Especially this photo looks great. Unfortunately, the car wasn't as fast as this photo may you think
indicate. Yes.
Right.
Well, that's probably the only thing. Like you could probably make it look fast in photos, but not in races, unfortunately. Again, no disrespect to Brazilian engineering and Brazilian drivers. It just wasn't a very successful project from the management standpoint, and of course sponsorships were tough and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. And anyway, we had a lot of yellow this year. So 3 teams with
Renault.
yellow, and the last one, of course, the classic yellow by Renault, the RS10, as we see it here. Yes,
and this kind of yellow and blue for Renault, it would become really iconic colors. A lot of races and championships were won using this livery. And again, this is a turbo, which is another cool thing about it.
Right.
Yeah. And if you think about it, this was very risky, right? Risky decision to put a turbo car. Right. And really, hands up to and a big round of applause for Renault for doing that. That was really cool. And sorry, guys, like if you're listening to us as a podcast, we're looking at RS10.
Right. And important to point out, we discussed that Lotus, the ground effect was quite easy to copy. And on the other hand, the turbo engine was a very risky decision for Renault. On the other hand, it had the big advantage. When becoming successful, it wasn't that easy for others to copy. So you cannot just copy it and come the next year with a turbo engine. So this would need some years. So here they had a competitive advantage, which was difficult to copy.
Absolutely, but the whole bet on turbo was quite a big bet. Like it could have gone horribly wrong, and and we are really it's really luck that they decided to do it, and then, as Patrick already mentioned, it will become quite mainstream in the next few years.
Right. And let's come to black and gold. As you said, this was your preferred leverage for Lotus. Also, it seems that Walter Wolf liked it very much because he used this for his cars and also his private companies. Also, we discussed James Hunt. He quit, but there had been another famous driver. Maybe you recognize him. We are talking about Keke Rosberg, also having some success in later years.
Mm-hmm.
So he started with the Walter Wolf team.
Brilliant, yeah. And we're looking at Wolf WR7. Mm-hmm.
Right. Now that's some of the smaller teams. The Ensign N179. I think it was the last year of that car in Formula One, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Shadow, quite nice livery from my point of view. Having the Samson, the tobacco. If you're interested in tobacco, we have two special episodes, but with the big lion, so very nice colors, white, dark blue, orange, and the big lion in front.
Yeah, that's right. But again, not very. So just I think was quite outdated. Shadow, so the Shadow DM9, yes. Because it looks a little bit like a car from 1975 even. but certainly, Shadow was like really great team. But yeah, this was not one of their better years.
Yeah. Better years, especially in the first half of the year, had been the other French team, Ligier, in the typical French blue, like a complete national team with having Gitans as main sponsor, having a French driver. And we discussed this. And here aligning to another of our special episode about French teams, because here the government really supported the French teams to get French sponsorship, connect them with French drivers. So here government typically was quite involved in economics and also in the sports. And this may explain why we have this quite national teams, French cars, French sponsors, and French drivers. Same with Renault, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the
Williams, yes. FW07.
Right, Frank Williams, WW7, no, just 10.
Yeah, very nice. I mean, I do like the white color, and we already talked about the like Williams team and the technology behind it. But yeah, certainly very. It really stands out with like black wheels and white.
Right, and just looking at their sponsors on the side, they are one of the main sponsors is Leyland. If I'm not completely wrong, because they've changed many times the name. This was the British car manufacturer which never participated in Formula One besides being a sponsor.
Mm-hmm. Well, as usual, so Williams would have more sponsors probably than others, which is probably why they went with the white. And again, Patrick and I have already talked about color, how you normally paint the car. And obviously white color helps also with the speed because it's lighter. Your car is lighter ultimately if it's just white. So I think it's it's cheaper, it's lighter, and you can put a lot more names on the car. Yeah.
Yes, and besides this, I assume it helps with the heat, as it shouldn't get that hot as a black car, especially relevant maybe in races in Brazil, South Africa. Besides the lot of white, it also includes dark British racing green. So a very aesthetic car from my point of view. Speaking about aesthetic cars and very unique,
arrows.
I think, right? If I'm just thinking, I don't have any other examples of golden cars besides this very beautiful and unique Arrows A2, which had been
it's very cute and looks
very cute.
yeah, and if you remember, we just showed you McLaren car, and this is now we're looking at Arrows A2, and the idea is similar, but look at the aerodynamics of this car. It looks like, actually, if you put it probably on a circuit now, so many people would think that it could be quite modern car, especially the one that we see in more experimental races, not Formula One, but very cute car, and looks a little bit like a plane, and certainly very aerodynamic. Well, there are obvious problems there, but it is an interesting design, and I think they took it a little bit farther than McLaren, which is why it's such a cute car. And I agree, the gold helps it stand out from the rest.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me a little bit to today's IndyCar and Formula E cars.
Yeah, Formula E. That's it. So we showed some of the Formula E here in when we talked about kind of innovations, and definitely. I think there was even a gold car that we showed, like e-car, that was very similar to this one.
I think, it wasn't a Formula E. If I remember, you mean the Robocar, the autonomous car.
There was Robocar.
I think one of them was gold.
Yeah.
And besides this, it reminds me a little bit to the first versions of the Eifelland from 1972, designed by Luigi Colani, as it started, not as it ended, because the car completely changed from a very strange looking car, similar to this, to a much more conventional design. And unfortunately, a little bit similar to the Eifelland, also this Arrows A2 didn't had too much success in this year.
Yeah, but it's a little bit like they took like this bullet car, right? And then they try to experiment with it, right? So it's like the wings and the front, and so. But again, that kind of comes back to my point that you can't like have all bets on different things. Then you don't do anything well, right? You need to make your to make a decision on what is your feature.
Exactly. And besides looking very futuristic, very different than the rest of the field, the engine itself was very conventional because it was the Ford Cosworth, as many other teams in this year. And the gold, besides that it looked great and outstanding, was also, of course, related to their main sponsor, the Warsteiner beer, which is golden. That's maybe the reason why they started having this color.
Yeah, and Alfa Romeo. Yeah, 177.
At least the show today is Alfa Romeo, and this is as the car usually looked, in opposite to the one which I showed you, which has a much more white, but this was just for Vittorio Brambilla and the Italian Grand Prix. Normally the car looked more like this, and this is Giacomelli. Also here the car looks a little bit old-fashioned, which is related to the big flat 12 engine, where you couldn't create such a modern ground effect aerodynamic car. For this, the car looked also a little bit old-fashioned.
Yeah, it looks like a Beetle car.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see the exaggerated back, and so obviously,
Yeah.
the engine, definitely launch engine obviously doesn't help.
Yeah, but to defend, this was the first year after they came back after around 30
Well,
years, so it was
but it's
niche a
Alfa
little bit.
Romeo, right? How
Yeah,
bad can it be?
right, right,
Yeah.
right, and that's all for the cars. As I said, I couldn't find a photo of this very small German car, which looked great. But anyway, we come to the people, and here the top three. No surprise, as Ferrari took the Manufacturers' Championship, that 1 and 2 drivers also came from Ferrari. Number 1, South African Jody
Jody.
Scheckter. Maybe he wasn't the faster driver, but more the more constant driver, and due to this, he took the championship that year.
Yeah, consistency is a big deal. Yeah, so we already talked about Gilles Villeneuve and the infamous incident with tires. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. So that's Netherlands Grand Prix, and Alan Jones, whom we've seen before in previous seasons, but was very good. Was very good season for Williams, and good to see him in this lineup.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think he will have a good future in Formula One.
Yeah, Jacques Laffite, again, we talked about him. Claire Regazzoni, we have a special, I believe, on Claire Regazzoni.
Yes,
Patrick
yeah.
Depailler, and again, an interesting comparison between the first three and the next three, with
Yes.
age. If you look at age, it's like, at least the next three guys are basically older. Yeah.
Yes. And then the last three, 7 to 9, Carlos Reutemann, the second one in Williams. Rene Arnoux, the one in the Turbo Renault, and John Watson with the McLaren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's amazing. Like we actually haven't spoken about Carlos Reutemann, but if you look at his career, it's quite a long career in Formula
Exactly.
One.
And you may say the best, the strongest year may still to come, in which we will discuss in one of the later episodes. And I'm optimistic also that we can do a special episode about him, as he was not only a very fast driver, also an interesting character, later going into Argentinian politics.
Politics, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, we also have a politician, and I don't know how successful his career was in politics, but yeah, certainly very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, a lot of people would have liked if he would become a presidential candidate, because as a governor in his province, he did quite well, but he declined, so he didn't went to become a candidate. If yes, maybe he would have become Argentinian president. I mean, he was quite loved by the Argentinians in average, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that he was very, very popular. I'm just I just don't know much about his political career, so yeah, it's definitely something that we need to look into for maybe a special on him. Yeah.
Right. Behavior.
Yeah, so we've talked quite at length about behavior, and I think this was an interesting season in terms of and I was gonna say this about legacy, that to me this was a season of retirements, right? Where
right.
we saw a lot of retirements, but at the same time, I think the main the cool thing about the season, like Patrick mentioned at the beginning, was the agility with which you could switch to different technologies as a driver and having a dominant technology as a team, right? So that we saw that teams with hybrid ideas, so that going after everything were not succeeding, whereas the teams that had a particular bet on a particular thing would be more successful. Yeah, and in terms of notable character, I would say, of course, no disrespect to Jody Scheckter, it's Gilles Villeneuve, because of this absolutely iconic incident in the Netherlands where he, managed to do the impossible.
Yeah.
Notable wins. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can pick one this season. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I would say the victory of Tyrell in France, because it's the first victory of a turbo car, and was this the first sign of a new generation of Formula One cars? Not
I like that. Let's go with Renault. Yeah.
Yes, and notable strategies here, I would say Ferrari, with understanding that with reliability you still can win the championship, so they're not rushed into new developments, and at least understood that for 79 it was the best strategy to have a quite conservative approach to win the championship, which worked again this year. For next year, this would be a complete different topic, of course.
Yeah, but this is always a good dichotomy between reliability and speed, right? In Formula One, so certainly reliability wins, right? In this particular season,
but I mean, reliability is like the basic. If you don't have reliability, if you
but you can get away with it, right? We saw from Lotus. Remember when we discussed Lotus in previous seasons, especially like if we take 1970, it was very unreliable car, and we had the leading driver actually died. And yet, we have a champion, constructor and driver champion there. So definitely, but this is like really cool, because it's also reliability also tells you that you can take less risk on this, on the circuit, so you don't need to kill yourself and your team trying to win in a potentially inferior car. But if you are stable, right, and you are constantly scoring and you are constantly in the top 3, you don't actually need to be the winner all the time, and that makes it safer and more strategic, which makes it more interesting at the same time.
I agree.
And to me, this is a year of retirements. But certainly also we can mention the turbo technology, big risk and big win for Renault.
Exactly. So we have an end for many drivers and a new beginning of a new chapter, the turbo chapter.
That's right. All right. So that was 1 hour and 45 minutes of us talking about 1979 season. Thank you for being with us again. Thanks to Patrick, we're present at many different many different platforms. The video is available on YouTube and Spotify. We are present on Amazon and other platforms as a podcast as well. But again, we encourage you to watch the video, because we show pictures and various visuals. So please check out the video if you can. It will make more sense to you. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.